Is everybody ready? Yeah. Okay. Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming. The purpose of this conference today is to provide the investigative findings of the officer-involved shooting that we had on April 21st and answer any questions about the shooting itself or about the investigative process. I have a brief statement that I'll read about it and then open it up to questions regarding, again, either the process or the shooting. The investigation was conducted by a multi-jurisdictional team and monitored by investigators from the Pierce County Prosecutor's Office. The investigation consisted of audio and video recorded statements from 11 eyewitnesses, most of whom were civilian employees working in the lumberyard. We analyzed video, gathered a variety of physical evidence, and interviewed the two involved officers. The evidence, witness statements, and officer statements all support the following account. On April 21st at 1:15, an employee of the Pinnacle Lumber Plywood Warehouse called 911, stating an unknown male, later identified as Daniel Covarrubias, entered the lumberyard and looked like he was running from the police. The caller told the 911 operator that Mr. Covarrubias had climbed up to the top of a 25-foot lumber rack and was hiding. Officers David Butts and Ryan Hamilton arrived on scene at 1:20 and entered the lumberyard, while a third officer went around to the back to act as containment. Officers Butts and Hamilton approached the lumber rack and attempted to verbally communicate with Mr. Covarrubias, who was non-communicative. Mr. Covarrubias was in a crouched position on top of the elevated stack of lumber and was seen reaching into his pockets. Officers gave him numerous commands to show his hands, but Mr. Covarrubias did not respond. Seconds later, Mr. Covarrubias raised up with a dark object in his hand and pointed it at the officers in a manner that was consistent with pointing a firearm. Mr. Covarrubias crouched back down while Officers Butts and Hamilton continued to direct him to show his hands. Mr. Covarrubias quickly raised up a second time and again pointed the dark object at the officers. At that point, Officers Butts and Hamilton, both fearing that Mr. Covarrubias was pointing a gun at them, fired their weapons. Their shots began near simultaneously, with a total of 9 shots being fired between the two officers. Mr. Covarrubias dropped again into a crouching position, but quickly rose up again, pointing the dark object at the officers a third time, and then dropped back down onto the lumber. From the first time Mr. Covarrubias pointed the dark object at Officers Butts and Hamilton to the last shot being fired was approximately 6 seconds. A ladder was then obtained from the fire department, who was already on scene. Officers climbed up the ladder, made sure Mr. Covarrubias was secure, and lowered him down to the awaiting medical aid to transport to the hospital. It was at this time that we learned the dark object in Mr. Covarrubias' hand was not a gun, but a cell phone. The investigation from here will be a matter of formally putting it together and presenting it to the Pierce County Prosecutor's Office, which may be a matter of weeks to maybe even more than a month. There are some questions that we also try to answer with this investigation as it unfolded. One of those questions being, why would anybody point something at police officers to mimic a gun, if not a real gun? And the investigation shows that Mr. Covarrubias had potentially been awake for 3 days without food, under the influence of methamphetamine, and possibly hallucinating. Definitely a contributing factor to his mental state, and would be a possible explanation for why he or anybody would do that. Another another question that I know has come up has to do with the release of information and when we would or would not release information. And our primary objective in this is to maintain the integrity of the investigation. Releasing any information too early can tamper with future witness statements and again damage the integrity of the investigation. And that is our first and foremost, our goal is to make sure that the investigation is thorough, is accurate, and maintains integrity throughout. As far as the timeline goes for the release of information, every investigation is different. Some officer-involved shootings or any investigation may have multiple witnesses to interview. Some may have none. There might be thousands of items of evidence to pick up. There might be 10. Each investigation is unique, and the uniqueness of those investigations is what determines how long the investigation will take and how long it will be before we're able to release information. And finally, the question that has been brought up is the question of de-escalation and attempts to de-escalate. And we absolutely do when we are given the opportunity to. In this case, Officers Butts and Hamilton made every effort to verbally communicate with Mr. Covarrubias. He would not reply, he would not do anything other than what they thought was a gun at them, making de-escalation impossible for our officers. I'm not going to ask our officers to stand there with a gun pointed at them or what they believe to be a gun pointed at them and not take actions to defend their lives. So those are the some of the main questions that I know that have come up since the investigation. What I recapped is what we discovered during the investigation. And I'm open to any questions that anybody may have.
So why, you told this to the family on Friday, is that correct?
Correct.
Given this explanation, why are they up front still upset?
The explanation is not meant to make them, or make this any easier for them, or make them happy about it. There's no amount of explanation that would do that. For them or any family of a loved one who was killed or died in any manner. But it's the right thing to do to provide them the answers as far as what the investigation showed. And no matter what the circumstances are, they still lost a loved one. And they deserve to hear them and be able to ask their own questions prior to everybody finding out via the media or social media.
Was there a chance for the officers to take cover and provide a perimeter and use less than lethal means on him, even though they believed he had a gun?
There was not, and when you talk about using less lethal means, that is never a response for a lethal threat, or what is believed to be a lethal threat. And as far as cover goes, they just simply didn't have the time to take any cover. And he, as I said, he popped up the first time and pointed a dark object at them, and then dropped back down. And before they had a chance to retreat or take any cover, he popped back up again. So that it unfolded so quickly they didn't have a chance to take cover or use any other means.
Were you able to demonstrate how he went down? I mean, there was one little video, it was hard to tell on that. Were you able to demonstrate basically what he did as far as with his cell phone?
I can tell you that what the officers described and what the witnesses described are him pointing the cell phone like a gun. And that's as best of a description I can give you, an example I can give you. It was not him holding the phone in his hand like he's making a phone call. It was not just holding up a dark object. It was definitely described by not just the officers, but the civilian witnesses as him mimicking a gun.
Any idea why Rubius was there?
No, he had no ties to the lumberyard. He may have been trying to walk home, which is in Parkland. What the initial caller to 911 stated was that they believed he was running from police because they heard sirens in the area, and that's when he ran into the lumberyard. We know that nobody was looking for him at the time. So we weren't looking for him, no other police agencies were looking for him. So if he was running from the police like the 911 caller thought, it was in his own imagination. We were not actually chasing him.
Could this have been handled differently by your officers?
Not safely. I could not have asked officers to do more with what they believed was a gun pointed at them.
The prosecutor's office will make the final decision, but I think I understand you believe this was justified, what they did.
Based on what we have in the investigation so far, and it is substantially complete, I absolutely do.
Are the officers still on leave? What's the status there?
No, they've gone through the process that we do for all officer-involved shootings, and they are back to duty.
How long have they been with the department, Mr. Butts and Mr. Hamilton?
They have 14 and 16 years in law enforcement respectively. They both came to the Lakewood Police Department when we started up in 2004 from the Pierce County Sheriff's Department.
The public is going to hear an unarmed man was shot and killed by your officers. Do you think you need to give an apology to this family? They're going to be demanding that, I imagine, as we go out there. I mean, what do you want to say to the family about what happened when?
Well, the same thing I told them Friday is I am definitely sorry for their loss, but I will say that the officers were put into that position by Daniel Covarrubias and his actions. Whatever the motivation for his actions were, they were his actions. And again, I am not going to ask officers to do more or less than what they did when faced with what they believe is a lethal threat.
In the wake of the incidents in Baltimore, South Carolina, did that make you look more deeply at this case? Did this make you take pause at any step of the way?
It didn't really make me take pause. It definitely, I understand that we are working in a different environment now. Our process for officer-involved shootings has been pretty consistent, and it adheres with best practices. So there wasn't anything I was concerned about with our process. I just know that we are in a different environment now, and how, with the amount of scrutiny that there is, that even more transparency is required to answer any of the questions that are out there.
How far away were the officers from?
He was 25 feet up in the air, and as far as a direct line, I can't answer that without looking at it further.
I know it's the heat of the moment. Is there any way to see that it's a cell phone and not a gun in the nick of time, or is it just
No.
Just too bad?
Again, it takes a split second for one round to be fired. And in the amount of time they're evaluating whether or not it's a cell phone or a gun or what that dark object is, the round that could kill them can be fired. And that's what I'm not going to ask them to wait for. And again, I can't state this enough. It wasn't just that he had a dark object in his hand. It's that he mimicked having a gun and mimicked pointing a gun at them. So it wasn't just that there was a phone in his hand or just that it was a dark object. It was his actions were that of somebody pointing a gun.
How do you know he was awake for 3 days?
We have reports that we had obtained from St. Clair Hospital where he was that morning, and that's where we got a lot of the background on his actions and his mental state leading up to the shooting.
What kind of a phone was it?
I'm not sure which kind of phone it was.
When were the officers interviewed and what influenced that? It seemed like that was maybe happened a little later than in other cases, and that the information wasn't released immediately because a lot of it was contingent on when those interviews would happen.
Right, well, as with any shooting, some of the last people you'll talk to are the people that shot, that did the shooting. And when you have a crime scene it's an outdoor crime scene, it takes a while to process. We have a lot of witnesses we have to interview and video that we have to analyze. All that has to be done first before we interview the shooting officers. So again, those are some of the unique factors that determine how long an investigation can take and how long it might be before information gets released.
And I know they get to take the time that they need. It's part of it's up to the officers, right? When they're interviewed as well, they can take the time that they need. Did that happen in this case?
Well, they can take the amount of time that they need to make sure that they're accurate and that their memories are accurate and that they have time for the adrenaline to come down, for them to make sure that they're remembering everything. I don't think I'd phrase it as they can take as much time as they need. It's as much time as is reasonable.
How are they on witness?
It is nothing that we celebrate. It's nothing that the officers celebrate or anybody else. It is a very difficult situation for the officers to be in. It's tough on them, it's tough on their families, and it's something that will be with them forever.
Had either of them been involved in a shooting before?
I don't believe so, no.
You talked about the timeline in a matter of 6 seconds.
Yes, sir.
Could you, just for clarity, could you go over that one more time? How does that 6 seconds, where does it begin? Obviously, it ends with the discharge of the firearms, but can you talk about where that starts?
Sure. So the 6 seconds that I talked about begins with the first time that Mr. Covarrubias comes up from his crouching position and points the dark object at the officers. Then he goes back down, and the officers are giving him verbal commands still. They have not fired. Then he comes back up a second time, and then the officers begin firing. And then he goes down again and actually comes back up a third time while the shots are being fired and points again and then goes down the final time. And it's between the first time that he comes up and points the dark object and the last time that he goes down. It's that, and the last shot being fired. That's the 6 seconds.
Do you have a cell phone on you, or you demonstrate what we're talking about?
I don't have a cell phone.
But safe to say, it's this kind of thing.
Could be. Cell phones are different shapes, and again, this is maybe similar to that. We do have the most compelling evidence was the video recorded statement of the civilian witnesses who demonstrated with a phone what they saw in the mimicking of a gun.
Did any of the officers or witnesses say that Daniel said anything during any of this?
Nothing.
And you said that he hopped a fence. Can you describe where he came from? Because the gate by the main office is open. He came in from the...
I don't believe he hopped a fence.
He just ran in. Did he run in from the O'Reilly's area?
The big open gate that's there, that's my understanding,
Just
yes.
ran that way. And how did he get up to the palace?
I think if you take your time, you can climb up to the top there. And it's, there's nothing obstructing somebody from walking back there.
And did he have a stack of pallets in front of him? Or was not pallets, but
Stack of lumber.
lumber. So he's behind the stack. Because then by the time we got there, the detectives had already removed some of that.
No, what was removed was the entire stack that he was on up when Mr. Covarrubias was up there. Once he was secured, a forklift was used to remove the entire rack and set it down on the ground.
So he was on that. There
Correct.
was a larger stack in front of him, so for him to be able to...
There wasn't anything in front of him, no. He had climbed up, I wish I had a picture of it. If you go out to the lumberyard, you'll see there was one stack after another with space in between, and he was able to climb up to the top rack and was just on top of a flat pile of 2x4s.
So you say he crouched, he wasn't crouching behind anything.
No, he was crouching flat down, but with his elevated position and the angle that the officers were looking at, he was not completely visible until he raised up.
So there was the angle that they couldn't see, so he's doing this just to see down?
Exactly, exactly.
Do any of your officers have any history dealing with the same person?
No, we've not found any history for our department.
So he didn't say anything to you, and your officers kept asking to get down, and he
Correct.
refused or just didn't respond?
There was no verbal communication at all from Mr. Covarrubias.
Were the officers under the assumption that he was armed? Like, had they heard that going in?
What was put out was that it was unknown if he was armed or on drugs. And indications are that they approached it as somebody that they just wanted to try and get down. But when he wasn't communicating and then started reaching in his pockets, the threat level elevated a little bit, and then when he actually came up and pointed the dark object out, and then that's when things really escalated.
And you said civilians corroborated this? You said video, you mean video testimony? They didn't have video.
They did have video. There was, when I say video evidence, it's video of the shooting that some of the witnesses took, and then also what they saw independent of the video.
And how many stated that they saw him raise up and act as if he had a weapon?
I don't know the exact number. There was 10 civilian witnesses that were eyewitnesses that were interviewed, that were there. Of those, I don't know how many people said that they actually saw him do that, more than just a couple. And then there was also the video that they took with their cell phones.
Yard itself.
There is a video camera there, but it's an older system and didn't have much clarity.
How many cell phone videos were there?
2.
Was there a threat, do they believe, because the freeway's up there, it's that level, fast food restaurant is there, did they think there was a threat to the surrounding area if he's got a weapon?
There was certainly, if he had a weapon, he had a tactical advantage being up that high and able to see the entire parking lot and the freeway and the covered with people walking around.
How many times was he shot?
5 times.
5 times by 2 separate officers.
Yeah, some of the ballistics are still being done. There was a total of 9 shots that were fired. Some of the ballistic work is still being done by the state crime lab. And so we can't say whose shots were whose. But we know that 2 officers fired 9 times and he was struck 5 times.
And so he did this thing 3 times. Was he shot at after the first one?
No,
Was he shot at the second one?
the shooting started after the second one. We
So
can't
the
say.
second and the third, could he have said, whoa, hey, I'm just playing? Or was it just not, it just happened so quick?
Well, when he popped up the 3rd time, it wasn't just popping up. He had pointed the dark object again. The 3rd time.
And he would have known that shots were being fired in this direction.
There's no question, yes. If he was of sound mind.
You don't know if he got hit during the first fall?
No. There's no way of knowing. Okay, if there's no other questions, if you do think of something that you forgot to ask, please direct your questions to our PIO, Chris Waller. We'll be happy to answer any questions that are out there. And again, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, Chief.